All right. Our agenda for this evening is going to be my introduction of our speaker and then giving the floor over to her. We'll save some time for questions at the end. So today, our presentation is brought to us by Rachel Roth with Mind by Design. And here we go. Our presentation is focusing on supporting executive function and skill development both at home and at school. So I am excited to bring you Rachel Roth. Rachel is the Director of Educational Support Services at Mind by Design, and she has over 20 years of experience both in general and special education settings across public and private sectors. She provides educational support and executive functioning coaching for students and young adults, and she has a passion for helping neurodivergent learners build confidence and individualized strategies for success. Rachel holds a master's degree in special education from Santa Clara University, along with certificates in educational therapy and transition to adulthood. All right, I'm going to stop my share here and let Rachel share her screen for the presentation. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. So let me give you a little bit more information about me, just because I like to have some background information for you before I get into the nitty gritty here. So I have a neurodivergent family. My husband has ADHD and autism, as does my son. And I myself have a learning disability, which means that I have a wealth of life experience, both in and out of the classroom, both sides of the IEP table. And as Tara said, I have over 20 years of experience in the field of education. I have taught at all levels of education, K-12, and I have been an educational consultant for the last 7 years, 5 of which have been with Mind by Design, almost from the very beginning. And today I want to talk to you about 2 things. One is, what are executive functioning skills? And the other is how we teach and develop these skills with our children. So let's start with what are executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are really considered to be the CEO or air traffic controllers of our brains. They sit here in the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of our brain. And they really, they're not fixed traits, but they are mental skills involved in helping us plan, focus, solve problems, and achieve our goals. And they, like any other skill that we learn, they can be developed and strengthened over time with practice and strategies. And they can help us enhance our focus, productivity, and overall well-being. These are basically tools that help us navigate our day-to-day life, help us stay on track, think critically, and make good choices. And as we think about this, it's really important for us to also think about where in our brain these things happen. So as I mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is really the home of our CEO. And there are really 2 main contributors to the development of executive functioning skills: biology and experience. But our potential for that is really innate. And we are born with the ability to be able to develop these skills. And just like we can develop language skills and learn how to read, we can also develop executive functioning skills. We just have to learn and develop them. And research has told us that really it can take a minimum of 25 years for these skills to fully mature. It used to be believed that the prefrontal cortex stays underdeveloped until our teen years, and then our mid-20s, it kind of finalizes. Now what they're saying is that we have the ability to develop these skills into adulthood. So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for regulating our cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning. When we think about the factors that contribute to the development of skills, we also have to think about the fact that genetics can play a role. So if you have a neurodivergence, or environmental toxins can sometimes play a role, access to resources, increased stress during childhood can affect how well you develop these skills and retain these skills, and our ability to actually use these skills. And our prefrontal cortex is also highly connected to other areas of the brain, which help us kind of develop. So these skills develop we have several periods of growth during our childhood and during our life, and they develop through a process of increased skill development and something called synaptic pruning. And synaptic pruning is basically where, when we use a portion of our brain, when we use a part of our brain, we tend to, or use a skill repeatedly, we tend to keep that skill. If there's a skill that we don't use, then we tend to lose that. And that's because our brain has a finite capacity for holding things. So when we're babies and we're learning and learning and learning and learning, we're constantly learning new skills. So our first period of pruning really happens around age 5, because we've had all this rapid learning, and we start to consolidate skills so that we can refine the connections and strengthen the ones that we have and get rid of the things that we don't need anymore. We also see another period of synaptic pruning during adolescence. And that's a really important period of time, because we're also dealing with hormones and an influx of other things happening that can have an impact on our ability to decide which skills we're going to retain and which skills we're going to get rid of. So we have a heightened adaptability to change during adolescence as well, which means that our brains are in this period of growing and fostering new connections, ties into this concept of neuroplasticity, which really means that our brains constantly have the capacity to grow and train and create new connections and learn. And we have to be actively doing and practicing to be able to really keep the skills that we want to keep. And that's where training our brain comes in. The more effort we put into training our brain, the more likely we are to actually grow strong skills in these areas. And something that I thought would be a good resource for you to take away is this chart, which you'll have a copy of in your handouts. And this basically goes and talks about the development of executive functioning skills over the years, from infancy all the way to adulthood. And I snapshotted just a piece of this because I thought it was really important for you to see that, as a toddler, for example, in task initiation, we're able to independently start and complete tasks that can take up to 10 minutes. But outside of that capacity, the attention span isn't there anymore. That goes up to 30 to 60 minutes in our early learning phases from ages 5 to 12. And then in teenage years, it can go from 60 to 90 minutes, and so on and so forth. So as we grow and develop, our capacity for doing these things increases and grows. So let's talk about these skills in a little more detail. Executive functioning is really a term that refers to the cognitive processes that are required to plan and organize activities, to start a task, to organize, to follow through, our ability to work with information actively, use our working memory, to manage time, to manage our tasks, to maintain attention long enough to complete a task, to regulate ourselves so that we're actually able to be productive and have focused work time, to think and problem solve, to be flexible. And this is a hard thing to do. This is not like we can snap our fingers and just make it happen. And the thing is, it's not the what of our knowledge, but the how. It's how we use each of these skills to help us grow and develop, and how we use these skills to be the best version of ourselves we can. And that's where that metacognitive piece comes in, where we're being reflective and we're thinking about how we can grow and how we can get things done and how we learn, and monitoring ourselves and thinking about what can we do better next time. Those all fall into that category of executive functioning. So why do these matter? So Peg Dawson, who is a big name in executive functioning research and education, says there's a parallel between the development of the brain and the development of a child's ability to act, think, and feel. And while intelligence measures one's ability to learn and understand, executive functioning actually determines how effectively we apply that intelligence. So it's really, really important to think about. Executive functioning skills, they help us set goals, make plans, make decisions. They help us resist distractions and impulses, but they also help us manage our lives in all types of environments. They prepare us for the mental demands that life throws at us. It even plays a role in social interactions, being able to show empathy towards others, understanding someone's perspective to help resolve conflict and build strong peer connections. It all ties back to this prefrontal cortex and our ability to critically think and problem solve. Okay, so now that we understand executive functioning skills, let's talk about some of the common challenges that we see, either with our kids at home or in the classroom if you're a teacher or a practitioner. So, procrastination is a big one, and it looks like avoiding doing the work, allowing yourself to be easily distracted. It might be having a conversation with yourself that says, "Oh, I can do it later." Or you ever hear your kids say, "Oh, I've got a whole week to do it. I don't need to do it right now. It won't take me that long." Or it's too hard, or I don't know what to do. And when they go down this path, it can be really hard to reverse course unless they have tools and strategies to help them. It can also look like being slow to start. That's that task initiation piece. It's too overwhelming. I don't know where to start, so I'm just not going to start. It can be difficulty maintaining attention. It can look like weak study skills, poor test performance. It can look like disorganized chaos, or what I call carpet bag or black hole syndrome for the backpack, where, like, if you think about the Mary Poppins carpet bag, how she's constantly pulling things out and pulling things out, and how could she possibly fit a whole size lamp in a bag? Doesn't make any sense to me. Magic, right? But reality is, some of these teenagers and some of these kids are walking around with so much stuff on their bags that they can't even find the things that they want, and they're so disorganized that it feels like their bag is a black hole or a carpet bag like Mary Poppins. And so we have to find ways to help it be less chaotic so they can find things and get credit for the work that they do. It could be weak or poor planning, misuse of time, forgetting to turn your work in. All of these are considered common challenges in executive functioning. So there's other layer of this is that when you ask a kid how they feel or why they're struggling, the most common things you can hear, "I just can't focus. It's just too hard. I get distracted by my thoughts. I don't know how to get started. It's too boring. I don't need to write it down. I'll remember it." And then we get the kid who's so frustrated because they didn't write it down or they couldn't get themselves to engage. Research has shown that students with executive functioning problems are 10 times more likely to struggle academically as they get older. And the reality is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to supporting our students who have executive functioning challenges. But the first thing we have to do is identify those gaps and deficits. And so commonalities, common threads we're looking for: high distractibility, variable levels of focus, poor organization, weak attention to detail, weak working memory, always asking to repeat directions. The rate and quality of work completion is low. And if you think about these are the opposite of the skills we need to be functional in the classroom and in the world of work when we're adults. But executive functioning skills and the ability to be able to be successful account for 2 times more variation in final grades than one's IQ. In other words, a weaker executive functioning skills are going to have a bigger impact on outcome than how smart and intelligent you are. And that's like, mind blown, right? But what can I do as a parent? What can I do as the classroom teacher? How can I juggle one more thing? I'm already overwhelmed. I already have so much on my plate. I can't help this kid. They're going to have to figure it out themselves. right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, people. It actually is just takes some patience, repetition, support, and we can help them reach success. And it starts by helping them fill their mental toolbox. So I have this cute little activity I do with my students where I print off a toolbox and I have them use little index cards and they create little visuals for all the things that we talk about that can be supportive for them: a timer, a planner, project planning in general, to-do lists, checklists, supplies, post-it notes, reminders. All of those things can help them because guess what? This work, while it's mentally demanding, it does help them rewire their brain. And it starts by taking that scattered, chaotic brain and helping them learn to focus. So the first strategy I want to talk to you about is the 15-minute rule. And the 15-minute rule is based on the premise that getting started is the hardest part of tasks. And it's based on the whole idea of, addressing procrastination. So we set a timer for 15 minutes, you get started, and it turns out that just the act of getting started, which is the hardest part of it, tricks your brain into moving forward, and you can work for longer than 15 minutes, or you can stop when that timer goes off and take a break. So when to use this is when it feels overwhelming. When they're too overwhelmed to get started, we want to do something to help them with chunking. And chunking and scaffolding is what the 15-minute rule really does. It chunks a task into manageable, small bites of time where they can take a break when they need to and then get right back at it. And it really makes a huge difference in productivity. You don't feel guilty. You don't feel pressure. You're not waiting to the last minute. It feels manageable. Anybody can do something for 15 minutes. It's really manageable. The next thing is learning how to learn. And learning how to learn is really one of the most important executive skills out there. We have to understand how our brain learns best and how to set ourselves up for success. But it's not instantaneous. Remember, mentally demanding work. It takes effort. And that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that we have to help these kids get over. Okay, so how do we learn how to learn? Well, there's this great book out there by Oakley called Learning How to Learn, how to succeed in all these different things. And one of the things that they talk about is that our brains really have two modes. We have a focus mode and a diffuse mode. And we shift throughout both of these two modes during the learning process. And they're both important in helping us learn. So the focus mode is when we're paying close attention to something, we're activating the learning process in the brain. The diffuse mode is we're relaxed, and our mind is free, and we're not thinking about anything specific. And it's during that interchange between the two that our brain starts to make those connections and be able to retain and learn and master those concepts. We also have to have self-awareness and self-regulation. I'm going to get into that a little more in a little bit of detail. But the fact of the matter is that self-awareness piece is such a critical piece of executive functioning. If I'm aware of how I learn, if I'm aware of what's getting in the way, then I can regulate, then I can get better, then I can better manage myself. And that's a big piece of this process. So we have to develop these skills. We have to efficiently acquire and retain new information. We have to be metacognitive and be reflective. And that brings me to my next point, which is we really go through three critical processes during the learning process. And we cycle through them. And they are experiment, reflect, adjust. By experimenting, we learn what works best for our brains. We use metacognitive skills to observe our own thinking and our responses. And reflection allows us to think about what worked, what didn't work, what adjustments do we have to make for next time. And then the reflective thinking helps us build awareness and cues us in to when we are distracted and helps us redirect ourselves back to task. And it's through these processes that we learn more about ourselves and our own learning, and we can apply that learning to future learning. So here's a little excerpt from the book, which says, brains are amazing. They're the most sophisticated gadgets in the universe. They change their structure depending on what you do with them. Pretty much anyone can do well in any subject if they know more about learning. Your brain is more powerful than you think. You just need to know how to turn on that power. And this process, experiment, reflect, adjust, is a piece of that process. There's a caveat, though. There's something that happens in our brains when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel stressed, when we feel dysregulated. And you can feel like this guy in the center here who has a post-it note on his forehead because he's trying to remember something, but he's got a gazillion different things going on in his head trying to impact him. And what that leads to is what I call brain drain or a low battery. And that low mental battery means it's really hard to do anything else. And I want to talk about the role that dysregulation plays and stress plays in our learning process. And it all starts with the amygdala. I love this comic. We talked about this. No stress signs unless there's a real problem. So this is the brain talking to the amygdala. The amygdala is part of our limbic system. And it's in charge of our fight or flight response, fight, flight, or freeze. It does not play nice. Okay. What researchers have shown is that when our amygdala is flaring, so when we're in that high stress response, the prefrontal cortex shuts down and other processes shut down because our body is preparing to run or freeze because we're in that over alert state. Once it's activated, it takes over your entire brain. So the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to calm it down. And to calm it down, we have to know what helps us calm down. Because when our emotions take over, that leads to brain drain. And then you just feel like completely mentally exhausted and you can't do anything else. And that's not helpful or useful. And it definitely does not aid in the learning process. So that brings me to self-awareness and self-regulation. This poor little brain's trying to figure out how to deal with all his emotions. Okay, so metacognition is a big part of this self-regulation process. Self-regulation is the ability to understand and manage our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors and our physical responses. It also helps us respond to stressful situations and to adapt to the demands that life throws at us so that we can keep ourselves in that calm, steady state unless there's really a true emergency. So understanding how we react to challenges, minimizing the impact on ourselves, it requires emotional awareness and emotional intelligence. And our bodies have to be able to adapt to mental and physical challenges so that we can have enough stamina to handle whatever life throws at us. And all of that is in that metacognitive self-reflective piece. So metacognition involves several different steps. And it starts with that reflective thinking piece. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? Did something trigger that feeling? I'm noticing, I'm seeing, I'm thinking, I'm pondering, right? So being reflective can be a very, very powerful tool. What can I do differently next time? What didn't work? How can I change? There's also this concept of cognitive flexibility. And there's this great, if you're not familiar with it, there's a great children's book series by Diane Alber, and it's called The Emotion Spots. And the spot of flexible thinking talks about flexing in the wind like a palm tree, which is why this palm tree is here. Because an oak tree is rigid. It stays still. The wind can't move it that much. But a palm tree, on a windy day, if you look outside, it flexes and moves and goes and adapts to whatever is around it. And that's cognitive flexibility. We want to be adaptable and flexible because mistakes are part of learning. So we have to really adapt to circumstances, and that helps us keep our brain calm. Knowing and understanding ourself, the whole oxygen mask on an airplane analogy, put the mask on yourself before you help somebody else. If I understand myself better, I'm more likely to recognize the signs that I might need help or might need to make a change. So this is really important. Mindfulness. So a lot of times when we talk to kids or teenagers about mindfulness, they roll their eyes. They're like, no, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. The reality is that once they start doing something, whether it's mindful breathing or grounding exercises or self-awareness related activities, they start to feel better and they start to stop calling it dumb and they start to use it without being prompted to do it. And that's really useful. And that taps into the whole idea of growth mindset. The idea behind all of this is we want to create an environment for meaningful learning, because when we make learning meaningful for kids and teenagers, they're able to make connections and they're able to retain the information and apply it to later use. So that's really, really important. Okay. The next part of self-awareness and self-regulation is emotional control. And what I mean by emotional control is not just the feeling part of our brain, but also the concept of impulsive thinking or impulsive actions, so impulsivity and frustration tolerance. Now, we know that kids who have ADHD and autism can show more impulsive behaviors and low frustration tolerance. And so, really, this boils down to, can I learn to control these parts of my brain? And anybody can, but it's mentally demanding work and requires patience and practice and reassurance, because otherwise they're going to get stuck and not know what to do. So, we start by talking about the fact that being able to effectively manage and regulate our emotions includes our ability to recognize, understand, and appropriately respond to our emotions as we experience them. So if I'm experiencing negative, toxic thoughts, like I'm not good enough, I will never be good enough, so and so is always better than me, I will never improve in this sport, that adds up over time, can affect self esteem and really not be productive in self regulation. Impulse control. These are the kids or the students who say or do something without really thinking it through and then come back and go, I don't have no idea what I was thinking. But helping them practice that reflective, what led you to do that? Why did you do that? And that why, understanding that why is really, really important. And when, as the adult in their life, when you're trying to help them process through this, I noticed you did this. I noticed this happened before. I noticed this happened after. Can you tell me more about why you behaved the way you did? I have a client right now who they finished their work in class and they just want to go talk to their friend, not realizing that by getting out of their seat and talking to their friend, they are distracting the learning of others around them. That's a poor impulse control act, and they have to work on that. And that's what guidance and scaffolding helps with. In addition, there is a link to emotional regulation and motivation. When we aren't motivated, we are less likely to control our impulses. We are less likely to control our emotional response. When we are motivated, we are more likely to have the extra split second to think something through before we act on it, which is really, really important. And then stress management is another piece of this, because stress is probably the biggest barrier to emotional control. When we are so stressed out that we are anxious and have too many things on our plate, that's when we have the most trouble regulating. And so being able to calm and control is really, really important. And that's where that brings me to this concept of stop and think, which is one of the handouts that is included in your emails. And stop and think really refers to, let me stop and think about what happened, what I can do, what I can't do, what's in my control, what's not in my control, and to help process through what they're feeling. And it's really, really important that we help kids do that, because as they learn how to do this with our help and we model it for them, they are more likely to be able to do it independently as adults and even as teenagers. We also have to think about that anxiety cycle, which is, it can be triggered and perpetuated when we don't process through things. So we have to have viable solutions. And what that means is really back to, let's build that self-regulation piece. Let's build that skill so that we know how to do it. And building self-regulation involves self-talk, grounding exercises like this 5-4-3-2-1 technique. Take a look around the room. What are 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste? That can really help calm the nerves. Also, breathing. We talked about that stop and think strategy. Mindful breathing, like there's box breathing where you take a deep breath in and hold it as you move your fingers into a box and exhale, inhale, and you do that a few times, and that really helps. Again, you're trying to calm down that amygdala response. Relaxation strategies. Also, I will tell you that as the adult, show them how you handle stress. Show them how you handle the emotions, the negative thoughts. Modeling is the biggest teacher for kids. And the more we model healthy ways to handle the emotions, the easier it is for them to learn and acquire these skills. So things that help: deep breathing, positive self-talk, do a coloring activity, go for a walk, talk with a friend, take breaks, listen to music, journaling, celebrate your wins. All of these things help build self-regulation. And then we talk about building resilience. And resilience is a life skill we don't really learn much about until we really have to. So we think about Sisyphus and constantly pushing the stone up the hill and how he can never give up. That's an example of resilience. It's that mental capacity to deal with or adapt to uncertainty and difficulty and adversity. And we have to teach our kids how to do this. And it starts with these 5 pillars. We have our energy, our focus, our inner drive, flexible thinking, strong relationships. They all contribute to building resilience. Having strong self-awareness, understanding your personality, your thoughts, your beliefs, your triggers, taking care of yourself, the ability to meet life's challenges with energy and confidence, having positive relationships, building and maintaining supportive bonds with others, practicing mindfulness, being fully present in the moment and observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment, and having a purpose, having a sense of belonging can also help. There's 5 basic characteristics of resilience: problem solving, strong social connections, having a survivor mentality, emotional regulation, and self-compassion. And all of these things help us build adaptability, flexibility, perseverance, grit, which is a great book called Grit, right? And I love this graphic. Give it your all, redo if necessary. Don't give up. Take time to do it right. All of these things make a huge difference. And again, modeling is really, really important here. We look at these kids and our kids, and we're expecting them to be able to do all these things, but we have to teach them how to do it. Because if we don't teach them, then they're not going to learn it, and they're not going to just magically get it through osmosis. So really, really important. So we have to recognize when we need support. We have to recognize when we're drifting off into la la land and pull ourselves back, and we have to model and teach how to do that. So relationships, routines, and reflection are all part of building personal resilience. Relationships, that relates to building strong social connections that provide support when we need it. Routine, having predictable schedules to create a sense of stability and safety. Reflection, taking time to think about our experiences and learn from them. All part of building that resilience piece. All right, so we've talked about our 15-minute rule. We've talked about how to learn. Now, what does that look like? Well, it looks like teaching them how to plan, which I had a student the other day say to me, I know planning is helpful. I just don't want to do it. And I just chuckled. And I'm like, okay, we'll revisit that conversation in a little bit. But it was really funny. Part of planning is knowing how to prioritize. And the Eisenhower matrix comes from President Eisenhower, who said, I have 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. And what he did was he created this matrix. And this matrix is a really useful tool. I have several students I work with right now who use this as their planner because they take a look at their week and they go, okay, if it's really important, I need to do it right now. I'm going to put it in that important and urgent category. If it's important but not urgent, I'm going to schedule when I'm going to do it. If it's not important but urgent, I'll delegate it to somebody else. And if it's not important and not urgent, I'm just going to delete it from my to-do list because it's not that important for me to do. This is a game changer for a lot of kids, and it really helps with big picture seeing how to prioritize and plan. So we define our priorities, we plan based on order of priority, we block out time for tasks that are urgent and important, and life feels less overwhelming to them. Amazing. Organization is also a piece of this. So we go back to that crazy cluttered backpack, right? Help them clear the clutter. Have systems both at home and at school. And they have a desk in the classroom. Make sure they have a way to keep the materials organized. At home, have file folders for every subject that they can regularly take things out of their school folder when they're done using them and put them in that file folder. Have clean, organized workspace so that it's distraction free and less likely to cause problems when they're trying to learn and study. Have it set aside like places specifically for items so that you always find them. Like I got a bin in our dining room where my son does his homework, where his math workbook lives, and he always knows he can go to his math workbook and get it when he has math homework. It's always in that same spot. Always keep things in the same place. Have them set aside time every week to stay organized. Have a set day and time on the schedule. Use a color coding system. All of these things make a huge difference in reducing the chaos and the clutter. Time management is another part of planning and prioritizing. And there are several different methods. The Pomodoro method was more well known than what I call the Flomodoro method or flow time. Pomodoro method says that you work in 25-minute chunks of time and you take a 5-minute break in between and then you reset. The flow time method or the Flomodoro method is you work for as long as your brain can focus and then take a break. And the rule of thumb that I have for that is that for every 15 minutes of productive work, you've earned a 5-minute break. And a lot of my teens like that, and they use that rule, and it makes a big difference. And then that break is a big movement break to give your brain a rest and a reset, which is really, really helpful. There's also this interesting tool called structured procrastination. I know you hear the procrastination word and it's, no, procrastination, we don't want to encourage procrastination. But structured procrastination is actually thinking about tasks that you have that you see as more important or difficult than studying and put them on the top of your to-do list. And then you avoid doing those and study instead. It's like you're tricking your brain into doing the thing that you need to be doing. That's actually a really useful tool. Making a weekly plan, a daily task list. Everybody has a different system they like to use. As long as it's consistent the same week to week, it's fine. Some people really, really live by daily schedules. I personally love making a weekly plan at the start of my week and adding on to it as I need to and changing it as I need to. A power hour is a term that came out of the corporate world where you find your most productive period of time during the day and you block that off as your work time so that you are always being the most focused and productive during that time period. One other thing that falls in the time management category is something called the 2-minute rule. And the 2-minute rule says that if I can do it in 2 minutes or less, just do it. It works wonders for a lot of people. Okay. We've talked about the 15-minute rule. We talked about teaching how to learn. How do we reduce the cognitive load? Well, cognitive load, what is cognitive load? It's basically our brain's capacity for doing things, and we're going to get to that. But I want to talk about task management because that's a piece of cognitive load and understanding cognitive load. So task analysis is a piece of task management. And task analysis involves breaking a task down and then doing something called backwards planning. So I have a month to do a project. I need to break it down into smaller chunks to be able to do it. A lot of teachers are starting to do this for kids already, but teaching them how to do it is really, really important. The way I teach it is I ask them to write down the steps of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or their favorite meal. And they often forget a step. And I said, okay, take this home and ask someone to do it following these steps and see how well it goes. And you'd be surprised the kind of feedback I get. Oh, I forgot to do this. I forgot to do this. So, task analysis involves asking, when is it due? How much time do I think it will take? And what are the requirements? I have to consider all of these components so I can plan when and I'm going to do what. Understanding the mental demand the task is going to require. Everything has a mental load. Everything requires a certain amount of mental effort. I have to know how much mental effort I have to exert to be able to complete this task. Something called smart multitasking, which is pairing a high mental demand task with a mindless activity. Studying while walking on the treadmill, studying while being on a stationary bike. That works. I've got kids who study and they pace. Something like that. Making an action plan can also help. Reducing the overwhelm is the overarching theme here. Okay, so that overwhelm comes down to this cognitive load. A person can only process so much information at once. Too much information leads to overload and overwhelm, and it can hinder how much information we're able to retain and move from working memory or short-term memory into that long-term memory piece. And so it's really important that we understand. The cognitive load theory refers to the amount of mental effort that we exert while performing a task. And there are three types. There's intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. Intrinsic cognitive load is the difficulty of a task. Extraneous cognitive load is the amount of effort we have to put forth for things that do not contribute to direct learning. And germane cognitive load describes the effort that we deliberately use to process an information for long-term storage. We want to reduce the intrinsic and extraneous cognitive load and increase the germane load. To be effective, we have to be able to optimize the extra information that we don't need. We have to be able to manage the difficulty of a task, and we have to be able to promote that, moving it from working memory into long-term memory. And this is why we talk about studying over a longer period of time as well, because the more repetition, the more we reduce that cognitive load, the more likely we are to remember the information later and be able to use it later. This is why cramming is never a good idea. Okay. Attention and focus is one of the biggest areas that affects executive functioning. And this is where we, as in the field of education, and even just as like coaches and parents and teachers and all these different things, we have to show these kids that having a schedule and a routine is okay. We have to be consistent. And this helps improve focus and productivity and decreases procrastination because it's going to be the same every single day. Building that self-awareness. We need to be cued into our signs of boredom, distraction, procrastination. One of the first questions I often ask students who come to me for help is, what is your mode of procrastination? And it's, when do you procrastinate the most? What bores you? What are your triggers? And we talk about them, and then we figure out how to address them. Exercise. Research has shown that exercise improves focus and attention. Even if you're only doing 5 or 10 minutes at a time, it makes a huge difference. As I said, a movement break in between focused learning is really, really helpful. Go do 10 jumping jacks, go back to working. It brings oxygen into your brain. It makes a huge difference. Diet and nutrition. High protein diets, less processed foods, less processed sugars also help with attention and focus. I teach kids about this concept of a mental battery. Just like our laptops or our phones or our tablets need to be charged when they're drained, our mental batteries need to be charged when they're drained, and we have to know how to help when that happens. And that's why we need to embed skills into our daily activities. And to do that, we have to have opportunities to practice and retain those skills. So, in summary, supporting executive functioning skill development includes having clear, consistent, predictable routines and expectations, involves teaching kids that multisensory learning is important, learning through all of our senses. In fact, the more senses we use, the more likely we are to remember information, especially when we're studying. Checking for understanding, having a safe, clean space for learning and growth, having opportunities to study and review. These are all things that a lot of us do naturally, but our kids have to learn how to do these and maintain them. And then study skills. We stopped teaching kids how to study, and the reality is that they need to learn how to do it. As I said, the more of our senses we use when we study, the better our retention is in the material. I have a phrase I use with a lot of my kids: read it, write it, say it, or read it, say it, write it, because I want them to use more than one sense. And they come back, oh my gosh, I did so much better because I did that. It's interactive. You're asking questions, you're teaching somebody else. It's hands-on. I have a lot of kids who I tell, write it down, it will help. And they're like, why? Well, because research says that writing things down helps it get from working memory into long-term memory. I also want to touch briefly on the fact that we're starting to realize that we don't necessarily have a learning style. What we have is a learning preference. And while doing things towards a preferred learning style is okay, we also want to make sure that we're comfortable learning in multiple different ways, because that's what helps us retain the information. Using study aids and study guides can also help boost focus and boost productivity, because we're doing things to help store information from working memory into long-term memory. These are things like doing Cornell notes, color-coded notes, annotating text when we're reading. I encourage students to get their own copy of novels when they're reading so they can actually annotate and highlight and write in them. Every kid is a little bit different, and you have to find what works for them. And then goals. We want to talk about setting goals. There's, motivation. When we look at a goal, when I talk about setting goals with kids, one of the things that I talk to them about is, what do you want to accomplish? What's going to be your biggest motivator? And then I said, is it realistic for you? Is it something that's going to help you get to where you want? What is your why? And your why about why you are here in this room with me. What is the end goal? Keep that end goal in sight. In fact, I often say to them, remember your why. What is your why? Why are we doing this? Because that helps them keep going. And then we just have to think about how we get there, and we have to plan backwards to get there. So we start with the smallest possible step and then move forward. Thank you so much for joining me tonight and listening to my talk on executive functioning skills. Mind by Design is, I want to talk to you a little bit about the company that I work at. We do psychoeducational assessments. We have speech and language assessments and therapy. We provide executive functioning coaching, parent coaching, academic tutoring services, counseling services, and we have offices in both Campbell and in Morgan Hill. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email this address or call our number, and we'd be happy to talk with you. Thank you again, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.